Sounds like a possibility.
It is sad in more ways than one.
In more ways than one. Okay, good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Menachos Daf Chaf Gimel Alamda Shadaf. Great for those of us who have been in yeshivas and like the discussions that are very subtle and very fine-tuned and very iyun oriented. We'll see quite a bit of that on Chaf Gimel Amid Beis. But for now, we're starting 3 lines from the bottom of Chaf Beis Amid Beis. The Gemara says tonight we have a Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'minchas kohen Mashiach b'minchas nesachim psula. If you have a mixture of the Minchas Kohen Mashiach and the Minchas Nesachim, they're puzzle because the Minchas Nesachim had more liquid in it. Shazu blilasa avev, shazu blilasa raka. One had more oil than the other, and when you mix them, behin bolo zumizu, it's no longer the average. So let's say one of them had 2 ounces, let's say one of them had 6 ounces. When you mix them together into one, neither of them have the requisite amount. Bolo zumizu my hava, says the Gemara. I don't understand. If they do draw from one another, who cares? Min biminohu. And even though there is rov and miut, it's still min bimino. So why would you say that? So says the Gemara on the top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, Amar Rava, Ksav Rabbi Yehuda, Kol Shu min bimino v'davar acher. When you have min bimino, but there is another factor going on. Yes, you're right. We have flour and flour. That's what the Menachos are made out of. But there's another feature of oil, so then we don't employ the regular rules. Then salakis mino kamishaenu v'she'enu mino rabba alav mavadlo. Normally we say min bimino is one set of halachos. Min bimino is eno batel. But here we don't say that in this case because there's more than one ingredient. It's not just mincha, it's also oil. Itmar, 3 lines down on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, we have a statement, a machlokes from the Amoraim. Kometz the minchas chote sheshamno. Normally we know that the minchas chote was meant to not be mehudar. The Gemara had said, well, wait 1 second. Earlier we said this, that the minchas chote, we wish we could make it more expensive for the chote so that he can a little bit pay for his crimes. But says the Gemara, we don't want the minchas chote to be mehudar. So there's a minchas chote which should not have oil, but it was sheshamno, but you added oil to it. Oh, so the minchas chote was supposed to just be regular flour. What happens if you ruin it and you add an oil? Machlokes amoraim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Apostle V'Reish Lakish Amar Hu Atzmo Meshachshecho B'Shiare Halogu Ma'alehu. Rabbi Yochanan says if you add oil to the minchas chote, it's possible. Reish Lakish said it anyway should have oil put on it. Says the Gemara, how can you say that the minchas chote is supposed to have oil on it? That's pashut, not true. 6 lines down. Vaksiv, the pasuk says, Lo yasim aleha shemen, lo yitin aleha levona, black on white. Pasuk state in Chumash. The pasuk says in Vayikra Perik Hey pasuk Yud Aleph that you're not allowed to put shemen on a minchas chote. So what is Reish Lakish talking about when he says that really hu atzma meshach shecho b'shiar lugum alei, that you should put some oil on the minchas chote? It's pashut, not true. So says the Gemara, what does Reish Lakish mean? It just has a different type of oil usage. There's no oil in the beginning, like before the kmitza is done, but only at a later point. So therefore, stam there's a machlokes. If there's oil that is added to a minchas chote, so how we would pass it, that's a machlokes. Rav Yochanan who says pasal and Reish Lakish who says kosher. Rav Yochanan's not having it. Esvei Rav Yochanan the Reish Lakish. I don't understand. And the question we're about to ask is a diuk from here. It's the question's not explicit. We'll have to draw it out of the words. Says the Gemara, Charev, if you have a dry korban mincha, shenis arev bebalul, if you have a dry mincha and it gets mixed with an oil-based mincha, it's balul. The halacha is yakriv. Tanakama says you can bring it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yakriv. Now, my lab, isn't this about when the Tanakama said that we have a dry one that's mixed with an oil-based one? My lab, that's a kometz de minchas chote de i'ariv bekometz de minchas nedava. Aren't we saying that the case that we're dealing with is where there's a kometz of a minchas chote, where there's no oil, with a minchas that gets mixed with a minchas nedava where there is oil, and there we say that it's yakriv, and here's the diuk. But had it only been a minchas chote alone, it would not have been yakriv if you would have added oil. That's against Reish Lakish. Says Gemara, lo, that's not the case of the brisa. The case of the brisa where it says charev shenis arib bebalul yakriv 8-9 lines down was talking about a different case. It was talking about minchas parim be'elim b'minchas kvasim. If you have the minchas parim be'elim, and that gets mixed with a minchas kvasim, and these cases are different because the case of the minchas parim ve'elim has way more oil than the case of the minchas kvasim, but they both have oil. On relative scales, one has more than the other. So when the Brisa 8 lines down said Charev Shenis Arba Bal Yakriv, it didn't mean a totally dry one like the Minchas Chote, but it was rather talking about the Minchas Kvasim, which has less oil, compared to the Minchas Parim Ve'elim, which has more oil. And therefore, we can't say that the Brisa is talking about a case of the Minchas Chote, and therefore, the question that Rabbi Yochanan asked on Rish Lakish falls apart. So says the Gemara, that's a problem. Your explanation of the Brisa is a problem. To say that it's talking about the Minchas Parim Ve'elim on the one side, which has more oil, and the Minchas Kvasim on the other, which has less, that can't be. Because we have that explicitly in a Tosefta. What does it say? Minchas Parim Ve'elim b'Minchas Kvasim v'Charev Shenis Ar b'Bal Yikra. We see that these two cases are separated. You actually wanted to say that the Charav Shenis Arba Bal Yaakov was talking about the case of the Minchas Parim. No, you're absolutely wrong. That's not what it's talking about. So because that's true, says the Gemara, it can't be that you're translating the Brisa correctly to say that Charav Shenis Arba Bal Yaakov is talking about Minchas Parim Ve'elim. You can't say that. Um, so, anyways, that's one pushback on the Brisa, and the continuation of that Tosefta is Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lo Yikrab. So, how do we have it that the Brisa 8, 9 lines down, when it says Charav Shenis Arba Bal Yakrib, how can you say that that's talking about Minchas Parim Ve'elim and Minchas Kvasim when the Tosefta specifically has both of those cases listed? So the Gemara says, don't worry, Prushe Kama Farishla. Really, the Brisa that was more esoteric, the first Brisa that we saw, the Brisa 8 lines down, which is also a Tosefta and Perak Dalet over here, the one it said Charav Shenis Arib Bibalu, that really was talking about a case of these. It wasn't actually talking about a charev, a mincha that was actually dry, but it was talking about a minchas kvasim, which had lesser oil, as it compares to the minchas parim ve'elim, which had more oil. We're a third of the way down. The Gemara says, "Boy Rava." Rava asks, "Kol meitz shemitza shimano al gabe eitzim mahu." Let's say that there's a kmitza, and I take the kmitza and it's saturated with oil, and in my hand I squeeze out all of the oil with all my might. Mitza, I squeezed it out. Shemitza shimano al gabe eitzim mao, and I take it and I squeeze it out over the wood on the mizbech. Do we say chibure olen keolen damo, that because they were connected, the oil and the mincha, that they are therefore still treated as one? Olav ke'olan dama, or do we not say that it's like an ola where they are connected? So Amalei Ravina Ravashi, Lav Hainu der Yochanan v'Reish Lakish. This sounds a lot like the machlokes that we just saw between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. How so? Not the machlokes that we just saw, but the machlokes we're about to see. To Itmar, we're a little bit more than a third of the way down on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. To Itmar, Hama'ale Ever She'en Bo Kezayis. Let's say that a person does Ha'alah Bachutz. They bring something kadosh and they bring it outside of the appropriate place. They bring it outside of the Azara into a place where only Chulin belongs. So says the Gemara, if I bring that outside, but the basar itself, it's an aver, it's a limb, she'ein bo kezayis. But ve'etzem, when with the bone in it, it's mashlimo lekazayis. So there's a small amount of meat, and the small amount of meat is less than a kazayis. Let's say it's 0.75 of a kazayis. But ve'etzem mashlimo lekazayis, and there is zero 0.5 of a bone. So that's 1.25. Now we have a kazayis. So my kazayis is combined of two things, less than a kazayis of basar, and a small amount of bone to get to that point where we would say that it's mashal. So says the Gemara as follows. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, that you're going to be chayiv, and Reish Lakish Amar, that you're going to be pater. So perhaps with the case of ha'alah bachutz, where you're adding in 0.75, slightly less than a kazayis of basar, and we're being mashlim to a kazayis with the bone of that limb. So Rav Yochanan says chayv and Rish Lakish says pater. Rav Yochanan Amar chayv because chibure olen ke'olen damo, because they're all connected. They're all connected. Rish Lakish Amar pater chibure olen la'al ke'olen damo. So perhaps The question that Rava asked, the chakira of the question that he asked, of do we say that it's chibure olan is ka'olan damo, that would be like Rav Yochanan, and that the other possibility of the chakira was olav ka'olan damo would be like Reish Lakish. Maybe those two things are connected. Maybe Rava's question is in fact the machlokas that we have between Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan in regards to whether or not we hold chibure olan is ka'olan damo. So it says the Gemara halfway down, about 8-9 lines before the new Mishnah, Tiboy Rabbi Yochanan. Rava's question would still be a question according to Rabbi Yochanan. Uti boy Reish Lakish, and Rava's question would also still be a question, even according to Reish Lakish. How so? Says the Gemara as follows: Tiboy Rabbi Yochanan. Why would it still be a question according to Rabbi Yochanan? Because perhaps Ad Kan Lo Ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan Hasem Ela Be'etzem. Maybe only when it comes to the aver that has less than a kazayas of meat, and the only way we get to a kazayas is because of the bone, maybe only there would we say that we're allowed to combine those two things. Why? Demina de basarhu. The bone and the meat, they're really one. They're part of the same animal. And in fact, we eat food like that all the time. When we eat wings, we say we're eating wings. The bone is part of it. When we weigh it, we weigh the bones as part of it. It's not separate. So maybe only there by Rav Yochanan, where the basar and the etzem are really one, there he would say that the two of them combine. But hacha, but over here in our case, aval hai, in the case of the oil that is squeezed out of the kmitza, delav mina dekomatulo. The oil is not a natural native part. There's no native oil in flour. It's only because it's added. So he might have said that it wouldn't aval hai delav mina dekomatulo. Maybe it wouldn't have been a good comparison. So you might have thought that Rava's question about squeezing out all the oil from the Korban Mincha was connected to the machlokes of Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. It could be that the etzem and the basar are considered the mina chad mina, who they're all one, but the oil and the mincha are not one min. O Dilma. We could even say that there's another reason why this isn't a good machlokas, that afilu the Reish Lakish lo ka'amar ela be'etzem, that maybe the only time Reish Lakish would say that you're pater, when we try to combine the etzem with the basar, is only there that you're pater, because the bar mifrashu. What does this mean? A bone is something that could pop off of a barbecue. If you've ever been at a barbecue, sometimes when the wood cracks, it can throw something off of it. And even a piece of chicken, if you're right on the wood, it could bounce it right off. V'i parish. And if in fact the bone were to bounce off, the halacha is that lav mitzvah la'ahadure. You have no obligation to put it back. The bone is in fact different than the meat. Aval shemen delav bar mifrashulo, but maybe oil, which really doesn't bounce off. I mean, it's kind of saturates quickly and burns off. That's not the same. Oh, dilma loshna, perhaps there's no difference, and therefore teku. In short, Rava asked a question a third of the way down. Let's just review the question, and now we know it's a teku. Rava's question was kometz shemitza shmanu al gabe eitzim mahu, that if I take a kmitza that is saturated with oil and I squeeze out all the oil on top of the wood, what would the halacha be? So we thought that perhaps it was connected to the machlokas of Yochanan Reish Lakish about whether or not we say chibur olan ka'olan damo or not. And the Gemara says no. Both Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan would find a distinction between a bone and meat on the one side and flour and oil on the other. That brings us to a brand new Mishnah on the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, another Amud to go. Please put on your thinking caps. This is one of the harder Gemaras that we've learned in this Masechta so far. The Mishnah is easy, kind of. Shtei Menachos. Let's say that we had two Korbanos Mincha. Shelo Nikmitzu. So they're in their raw form. They're in the Kli Shares. We have two pans that are ready to go. No Kmitza was done yet. And some careless Kohen bumped into the table. V'nis arvu zu bezu. And the flour of mincha number 1 and the flour of mincha number 2 got mixed. So now we're in big trouble. So says the Gemara as follows: Im yochol likmot mizu bifnei atzma umizu bifnei atzma ksheros. If I kind of sort of know where kmitza number 1 is, let's say that they spill in such a way, kind of like a Venn diagram, where The pan spills, I see my circle of mincha number one. The other pan spills, and I see my circle of number. If I can get away with doing kmitzas knowing that there really was no hisarvus, the halacha is ksheros. Both of them are going to be kosher. V'im lav. But if the mixture of the flour pans before the kmitza, that the full pan number one and full pan number two mixed in such a way where I can't distinguish between the two korbanos mincha, the halacha is that they are psulos. That does not work. You need to start over. These korbanos mincha are ruined. 12 lines from the bottom. Next case in the Mishnah. Kometz, if you have a kmitza, shenis arev b'mincha shelo nikmitza. So now let's take our two pans. Let's say I have two pans in front of me that are ready to go for kmitza. Neither of them have had kmitza yet. Good. Now I'm a Kohen, I reach into pan number one, I do my kmitza, and then I accidentally drop the kmitza that I took from pan one into pan two that never had a kmitza done. It's a fully prepared kli shares for mincha, ready to go. I took my kmitza from pan one and I accidentally dropped it in pan two. So that's kometz shenis arva b'mincha shelo nikmitza. The kmitza from pan one fell into the full korban mincha shelo nikmitza. So the halacha there is lo yakdir. You really should not be doing that type of korban. V'im hikdir, but if in fact one did bring this, zu shenikmitza ola lebailim, the one who did the kmitza, okay, your bailim who were bringing the korban mincha are yotze, you're good to go. Zu shelo nikmitza lo ola lebailim, but the mincha that it fell into, the mincha that was full, that you dropped the kmitza from pan number one into the pan where no kmitza had been done in pan number two, that is lo ola lebailim, which kind of makes sense because there was no kmitza. Why was there no bittul? That we're going to discuss in the Gemara at length. Last case of the Mishnah, nisarev komtza b'shiareha. Let's say that I grab a kmitza from pan number one, and I inadvertently drop it back in the pan. I drop it into its own shiureha, into its own shiraim. Oh, b'shiureha shel chaverta. Or in another pan where kmitza had been taken already, and there's shiraim. Halacha is lo yaktir. That's not appropriate to bring that on the mizbeach, but but if in fact you did, still the bailim of that korban mincha are yotze. Good. We are familiar, of course, with the pasuk in Chumash of Acharei Rabim Lahatos, that typically speaking, when we have a miut and a rov, the rov can be mevatel the miut, even midaoraisa in a 2-to-1 ratio. So let's say that I have two portions of kosher and one portion of non-kosher, and they all look exactly the same, no distinguishing marks. Halachically, there should be bittul in those cases. So therefore, the Gemara is a little bit bothered by what we just saw in our Mishnah. Let's learn about a very subtle machlokas, at least the language is subtle, between Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina. We're at the open of the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Rav Chizda, nevela, an animal that was nisnabel, it is betela b'shchuta. If you have one ribeye that's 12 ounces, but it's a nevela, and it falls into two ribeyes that are shchuta, that are properly shechted, no way to tell the difference. So there, the nevela is betela b'shchuta. There, the nevela does in fact become batil. It's acharei rabim lahatos, and we believe in bittul. So therefore, that which is not kosher is now kosher. The nevela is kosher. Why? Here's some lamdas for you. She'i efshar l'shchuta shete'asa nevela. Because there's no way for that which is shachut properly to ever become nevela. Once an animal has been shechted properly, it's impossible to make it a nevela. But the opposite is not true. Take a look at this. Last of the short lines. Ushchuta, if you have one ribeye that's a 12-ounce ribeye, and that falls into a bowl with two non-kosher ribeyes, ushchuta eina betela benevela. If I have one piece of kosher meat, it does not nullify, it doesn't become batel in the two pieces of nevela. Why? She'efshar lenevela shete'asa shchuta. Because it's possible for a nevela to be equivalent to a shchuta. Now, how is that possible? An animal that's a nevela could never become shchuta in regards to the halachic status of it being kosher. So says the Gemara, that's not what it means. Really, halachically, a nevela has tuma. What it means when it says that a nevela can become a shchuta is that the nevela can lose its tuma status. How does a nevela lose its tuma status? First of the long lines, dilechi misrecha. Once the meat starts to turn and it's no longer fresh and it starts to spoil a little bit, when that happens, parcha tumasa. So therefore, because a nevela is able to lose its tuma and have a similar tuma status of the shchuta, again, it's still usher to eat because it's nevela, but because a nevela could lose its tuma status, so therefore, says the Gemara, we don't allow for bittul in that direction because the shchuta is falling into a category of nevela, and the nevela could lose its status. All of that is the shita of Rav Chizda. Let's just review outside. A nevela will become batel in a shchuta in rov, and a shchita and a shchuta will not be batel in a nevela, which is rov. Now, Reb Chanina has the exact opposite svara in Psak. Reb Chanina Amar, Kol she'efshar lo lichios kamohu eino batel. That which is able to be like the other thing is never going to be batel. So Rav Chizda wanted to say a nevela will be batel in a shchuta. Says the Gemara, no. The nevela could become like the shchuta by losing its tuma status. So Rav Chanina would say that a nevela is not batela b'shchuta. And the other way, v'chol she'iyefshar lo lios kamohu, a shchuta which could never become batel, whereas Rav Chizda would say there is no bittul, Rav Chanina would say there is bittul in that case, no problem at all, because efshar lo lios kamoso, a nevela, a shchuta would be perfectly fine to become batel because it can become like the nevela in that the nevela can change. So says the Gemara. This machlokes of Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina, Ali B'daman. Who is their machlokes like? Just a couple lines from the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, the machlokes of Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina is like this. I Ali B'derabbanon. If you want to say it's like the shita of the Rabbanon, well, they hold ha'amri olin hu dulo mevatle ahadade, that when things are oled, they're not mevatel one another. Aval min bimino batel. But min bimino, when two things are very similar, there is bittel. So the machlokes of Reb Chanina and Reb Chizda can't be within the camp of the Rabbanon. Because within the camp of the Rabbanon, what we look at is min bimino. And what we're looking at is a ribeye that's nevela and the ribeye that's shchuta. That's min bimino. And min bimino is batel. In both directions, that's a question on Rav Chizda, and that's a question on Reb Chanina. So it can't be that Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina are arguing within the Rabbanon. And lastly, I aliba de Reb Yehuda. If you want to say the machlokes of Chizda and Reb Chanina is like Reb Yehuda, well, that's a problem too, because the Reb Yehuda basar chazusa azil. Reb Yehuda follows what it appears like. You may recall from just a blot or two ago, where we learned about the fact if blood falls into wine, we treat it like water. Ve'idi min b'minohu. They both look exactly the same. So min manavshach. Whether or not you hold like the Rabbanon or Reb Yehuda, that can't be what Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina are arguing within. Because according to both of those shitas, they should both agree with each other, and they don't. Ella says the Gemara, the machlokes between Rav Chizda and Reb Chanina is aliba de Reb Chia. Chav Gimel Amud Beis, 2 lines down. To Tani Reb Chia, nevela u'shchuta betelos zu bezu. A nevela that gets mixed up with shchuta, there is bittel. Now this line is only to be understood in one direction. Either that nevela will be batel in a rov of shchuta, or the opposite, but not both. And this is what the machlokes is. And Rashi highlights this on the 3rd line of the Rashi's Dibur Hamaschel B'Telo Zo B'Zo. V'Reb Chanina v'Reb Chizda mefarshe tamei d'Reb Chia u'b'ha pligi. The Reb Chizda savar nevela b'shchuta. Amar Reb Chia v'lo shchuta b'nevela. V'Reb Chanina mefarsh ibcha. So really what's happening is that there was this line of Reb Chia from a Mishnah, from a Brisa. The line said nevela u'shchuta b'telos zu b'zu. We weren't sure which direction Reb Chia was talking about. Reb Chizda held one way, And Reb Chanina held the other way. And the machlokas between the two, between Reb Chizda and Reb Chanina, is rooted in this enigmatic statement of the Brisa of Reb Chia that nevela ushchuta betelos zu bezu. Says the Gemara, fine. V'Reb Chia aliba deman. Reb Chia's statement of nevela ushchuta betelos zu bezu, he's going to have the same problem that we just had a moment ago when we tried to attribute the machlokas of Reb Chizda and Reb Chanina to the machlokas of the Rabbanan and Reb Yehuda. If Reb Chia's brisa was aliba de Rabbanan, well, still there shouldn't be a machlokas between Reb Chizda and Reb Chanina, because ha'amre olin hu de lo mevatle ahada de hamin b'mino batel. But according to the Rabbanan, we still would have said min b'mino is batel. So if Rav Chia would have held that way within the camp of the Rabbanan, then still there's no room for the machlokas between Rav Chizda and Reb Chanina. V'i aliba de Reb Yehuda, and if in fact it is according to Reb Yehuda, call min b'mino le Reb Yehuda lo batel. Reb Yehuda holds that there is no bittul, so min manashach. Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina can't be arguing about that. So even if you want to say they're arguing within Reb Chia, still Reb Chia has to be rooted in either the Rabbanan or Reb Yehuda. But if you say they're rooted in either of them, then there's no more room for a machlokas between Reb Chizda and Reb Chanina. So says the Gemara La'olam, really, this line, this cryptic line on the third line of the page of Reb Chia where he says, Nevela ushchuta betelos zubezu, really, it's aliba de Reb Yehuda. V'chi ka'ama Reb Yehuda min b'mino lo batil. When is it that Reb Yehuda says min b'mino is lo batil? Well, hani mili hecha de efshar leile mehabe kavosei. That's only when they're able to be like one another. Aval hecha de lo efshar leile mehabe kavosei batil. But where they are not able to be like one another, then there could be bittul by min b'mino. Ubehaka miflagi. And here is exactly what the machlokes is. Let me just summarize. Really, the machlokes of Chizda and Reb Chanina is within Reb Chia. And Reb Chia is holding like Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda holds that you're right in general, min b'mino is not batil. But where they are able to, where they're not able to be like one another, shchuta can't be like nevela or vice versa, batil. What's the machlokes? We're 10, 12 lines down. The Reb Chizda savar basar mevatel azlinan. According to Reb Chizda, we're always looking from the perspective of the mevatel. So if the mevatel is the shchuta, well, the shchuta can't change. It can't ever become a nevela. So therefore, a nevela can become batel in shchuta. And therefore, he holds the way that he does. V'Reb Chanina savar, no. We don't look at the mevatel, that which causes the bittul, the majority, the two portions versus the one, but rather savar basar batel azlinan. So therefore, he holds that when the singular item gets lost within the larger group, that's what we focus on when we look at Rav Yehuda's leniency within min b'mino to say that when is there bittul, it's only where it's the lo afshar la lemahavek havasei. So according to him, it's when the batel is the shchuta do we say that it can't change gears, and then he would say it's allowed. So the machlokes of Chizda, listen carefully, the machlokes of Chizda and Rav Chanina is based on Rav Chia within the camp of Rabbi Yehuda and his little split of a hair that not always does Rabbi Yehuda say that min b'mino is eino batel. If something can't change, then we would say min b'mino is batel, and that is where Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina diverge in their shitas. We're about a fifth of the way down, and let's continue. Tznan, we have our Mishnah. Next few lines should be easy because we learned them already in our Mishnah. We said, Shtei menachos shelo nikmetzu v'nisarvu zu bezu. Let's say that you had two korbanos mincha, and the two korbanos mincha had never had kmitza done to them. Two full pans of mincha, and they become mixed up. What did our Mishnah say? Im yachol likmot mizu bifnei atzma umizu bifnei atzma. If you're able to do a kmitza from each of them, good, ksheros. Im lav, but if they're really mixed up and you can't find a line of distinction between the two, so then the halacha is im lav that they're psulos. So says the Gemara, v'hahacha. In this case, kevan de kamitz leimichada. Ida chavale shirayim. If you do kmitza on one of them, and then the rest automatically becomes shirayim. V'lo mevatle shirayim letivla. The shirayim should have been mevatel the kmitza, but it wasn't. So I have a kmitza, I took it out, and it fell back in. Why wasn't the shirayim mevatel it? How could you stay? How could you say that it's still kosher? They should have been mevatel one another. Money. And again, the same chakira. That if you drop a korban mincha into the shiur, there should have been bittul. Yet our Mishnah doesn't say that. And elapshita must be like Rabbi Huda, who holds that there sometimes can be bittul, and sometimes there isn't bittul. So says the Gemara within Rabbi Huda's camp, which is now more developed because we already attributed the machlokes Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina into that world of Rabbi Huda. So says the Gemara a third of the way down. I could understand if you say that we follow the minority, the kmitza in my hand, batel have kemevatel. Well, that could, in theory, become like the mevatel, could become like the shirayim. Had it been other flour that was taken, then that would have been shirayim. Fine. Omar, according to the camp of Reb Chizda, that Basar Mevatel Azlinon, Shirayim Mikahavu Tivla. There's no way the Shirayim could have ever been anything other than it was. And therefore, says the Gemara, the Kmitza should have been Batil to it. So says the Gemara, Lema, perhaps we should say, and here we in fact have a little bit of a girsa change. Lema, perhaps we should say, De lo Reb Chizda, u de lo Reb Chia. It should not be like the way we understood Reb Chizda within the camp of Reb Chia. So says the Gemara, Hasam, that case of Reb Chia was really Kid Reb Zera. What did Reb Zera hold? To Amar Reb Zera, Nem Rak Tara Bekometz, V'nem Rak Tara B'Shirayim. We have a Gzera Shava. We have the word Haktar that was used by Kmitza, and we have the word Haktar that was used by Shirayim. Ma Haktara Ho'amura Bekometz, Ein HaKometz Mevatel Eschaveiro. Just like a haktara that was written by a kmitza, ein hakometz mevatel es chaveiro, the kometz can't do bittul. So too af haktara hamur b'shirayim ein shir mevatel es hakometz. Our case has a very special halacha kukimta of a gzeira shava, that the reason why there's no bittul is because there's a gzeira shava comparing haktara by kometz to haktara by shirayim. There's just no bittul. Very good. Let's learn another case, and we'll stop in about 10 lines, about 4 lines before the wide lines. And right now we're 2/3 of the way down. Toshma. Let's continue with the Mishnah that we learned on the previous Amud. Hakometz shenis'arev b'mincha shelo nikmitza. Pan number 1, I did the kmitza, I grabbed it out. And I dropped it into pan number 2 that was a totally full pan where no kmitza had ever been done. The din of the Mishnah was lo yaktir, but v'im hiktir, zu shenikmitza also l'baylim, zu shelo nikmitza lo also l'baylim. That if I take the kmitza from pan 1 and I drop it into pan 2, which was untouched, so the din is that the person who did the kmitza, they're yotze, and the second pan, that person was not yotze. Says the Gemara, v'lo kamavata le'tivla l'kometz. If I grab the kmitza from pan number 1 and I drop it in untouched pan number 2, why wasn't there bittul? Money. Who is that even like Bichlal? Rabbanon. If you want to say it's like the Rabbanon, Pashat, that doesn't work because Ha'amre Olin Hu Delo Mevat Lehadade, but Min Bemino Batil. Pashat, that dropping the kmitza from pan 1 into untouched pan 2 should have created bittul. Elapshita, it must be like that we're in the camp of Rabbi Yehuda like we saw earlier. So says the Gemara, here too it depends. I could understand according to Rav Chizda that we're looking from the perspective of the receiving end, and mevatel have kibatel de kol purta chazi lemikmatz mine v'havale min umino umin b'mino lo batil. That perhaps we could say, like one version of Rav Yehuda, that min b'mino is not batil. That I could understand, and therefore we could understand Rav Chizda. Elo lemanda omar basar batel azlinan. But according to the camp that holds like Reb Chanina, that we follow the batel, the miut that's going into the rove. So then, kometz mi kohavativla. Are you saying that the kmitza that I'm holding could then convert to a shirayim? It can't. So therefore, we don't understand any shitas at all. Lema de lo Reb Chia. And perhaps our Mishnah it breaks Reb Chia's enigmatic line at the top of the page. Says the Gemara here too, and with this we'll close. Hanami kid Reb Zera. This too, we could apply the Gzeira Shava of Reb Zera to remove the question and say, you're right in Lamdus, but Tachlis, we have a pasuk that indicates that there's just no bittul here. So we're going to pause right here at Tashma. Emir Tashem, tomorrow is the Robinson wedding. Baruch Hashem, a mazel tov to Rabbi and Rebbetzin Robinson on the marriage of their daughter. And we will have Daf Yomi at Ateres Ayala right after the chuppah. I will provide copies for everyone, and we will pick up Daf Yomi there tomorrow, starting 3/4 of the way from the bottom at the words Tashman Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.